engaged from the beginning of my part of serving youth with a very central theme, grace. I found it useful, and many of you found it useful to peruse the material written under the title Falling into Grace. Over these next 3 weeks, there was a sub-theme: true abundance. Before we get into that, let's take a very simple and careful and close look at what has caused, and as far as our perceptions can see, continues to cause a great deal of human suffering. If it were all that complicated, I wouldn't bother to mention it. I wouldn't take the time. We certainly are not here to focus on the problem. But to fail to recognize and understand why it persists after thousands of years in the large numbers of human beings that it does is to live in ignorance. And it's sometimes a little bit offensive at first to our highly developed intellects and our large educations to discover that the problem wasn't so complicated after all. We really know it. We hear it again and again, and sometimes we laugh, sometimes we chuckle, sometimes we laugh so hard we actually wake up out of it briefly. We can say it several ways. It's, in one sense, the belief that we can control things over which we have no control. And even if we're not so sure we can, we still want to try real hard. At some level, somehow, in this human experiment, we fell so far out of grace that we got to the point where we really started to believe that changing something out there will make us happy. Unity churches are today, and they always have been, filled with individuals who have experienced at least moments in which that erroneous belief disappeared. For a moment, we were lifted into such a state of consciousness that had nothing to do with anything out there really changing. And we knew that the problem was just how we were seeing it and how we were approaching it all. There are other ways to talk about it. Arguing with what is. I don't feel joined in my laughter here. Demanding that life be other than it is. That's the teaching of the world. In fact, we've been just successful enough at changing things through forcing and pushing and screaming and hollering that it's trapped us even further in the illusion that that's the way to do it. Push hard. Make it happen. Nothing will change if I don't do something about it, says the little separated false self. But there is this other teaching. And it's about grace. It is so counterintuitive that it's easy for me, at least, to understand why we keep pushing when it doesn't work. Surrender just doesn't come all that natural to us. The little egoic mind has been trained and conditioned from childhood to just saying, hey, I think I'll just accept this moment the way it is. It is this way. Anything other than that is to stand in opposition to the whole universe. That doesn't make much sense, does it? So therein lies the essence of the teaching of grace. Metaphysics, I would say somewhat unfortunately, fell, if not was seduced, right back into the Mosaic law. Change this and we'll get to change that. Change a thought, change a condition. Not that it doesn't work, but it's tedious. And there's so many things that we can't change. For example, beliefs that were embedded in us in childhood that we don't even remember were embedded. They're so far down in the unconscious or subconscious that we have no idea they're running us. So we have the advent of the Christ in Jesus. We really will be hard-pressed to find a better example of the possibility and potential of a power that can alter us at such depth that it completely changes our whole perception forever without a lot of our personal effort and help. That's what this teaching is about. If I'd only read it in metaphysical textbooks somewhere, I wouldn't stand here and talk to you about it. I'd say it's a good sounding theory. But by some grace, I know it to be the case. We do need practicality in our approach to life and wanting to be changed. There must be something we can do to help. I still remember an occasion in my life where I was not able to walk and was told I might not ever walk well again. And I was sent to the doctor, and L4 and L5 discs were determined to be chronically degenerated, and et cetera, et cetera. And the doctor said, well, you've got one chance. There's one thing you could do to get better. Can't guarantee it, but if you have the resources and the time, if you could just get in bed and, listen to this, be still for about 6 weeks. Use a sponge to bathe. Don't move. These things have been known at times to heal. And it might be many years before you need any surgery. Long and short of the story is I did lay in bed for 6 weeks. I remember a time in which, when we're really dense, and I don't mean this negatively, but when we're new to awakening, we hear these inner voices. They're very powerful. Once you start to really wake up, you don't have to hear a voice. You can almost sense by looking at a situation whether it's time to turn left or turn right. You don't have to run it through the logical thinking process. You don't have to hear a loud inner voice. You just go, I think not. I think over here is more right. But at that time, I was still a little dense, so the voice spoke to me regularly. Kept telling me I was being healed and regenerated. And I remember I got into a dialogue with him, kind of like, what was his name? Neil Donald Walsh. Conversation, whatever. nothing, please. Because if you do anything at all, you might get the idea that you're doing it, and we can't have that, can we? So over the next 3 weeks, and especially next week, this week, and all 3 Sunday morning services, I'm going to address myself to some of these pieces of grace, particularly as they relate to the word or the idea of abundance. Notice I used the word true abundance. So let me be more clear. How many of you have been in an uplifted state of consciousness that was so expanded that you no longer care one way or the other about your particular life situation? That's what I'm talking about. If, in our minds, we still believe that abundance means more stuff, faster, the right stuff, we're still operating in opposition to the truth. It's still the belief that something out there can make me happy rather than the understanding that truth rises and lifts us. Paradoxically, it does tend to produce a very benign world where things fall and click into place, does it not? Things that look like they were going to be really hard are just suddenly solved. So that's what I mean by true abundance. There are 2 parts of this that I'm going to elaborate on just a little bit this morning. We talked about the problem. Believing your thoughts, no matter how uplifting, is not the answer. Thoughts come and go, don't they? Yes? You ever had one come and stay? They're like everything else in the world of form. They are form. And the critical distinction that has to be made spiritually is this distinction, not between a positive thought and a negative thought, but between thought and attention. Where we actually have some freedom is in where we choose to direct our attention. And because the world of form has so entranced us and caught us in its spell, it's easy to understand, feel mercy for, and compassion for the fact that human beings become overly concerned about their particular circumstances. In so doing, we become even more contracted. We cannot see the larger picture at all. We usually can't even guess that what looks like is going wrong is actually something very right, if we could just let go and let it happen. We miss this entirely. So it's not thought, it's attention. And the most important, the most significant possibility is to allow attention to return and rest in what we call stillness. It's not as if it were some highfalutin metaphysical mystery. It's still right here, right now. In fact, the vast majority of this room is invisible, formless, still, and silent. That's exactly what we mean when we say we live, move, and have our being within this indescribable power. If we're looking for signs, we're still missing the point. The power flows directly out of the stillness and silence. It uplifts our minds. It enlightens us. It expands our awareness. It releases us from old, trapped emotions and limiting beliefs about ourselves and others, which are ourselves, appearing as others. Within the dream world. So, when I give the conference next week, I think you'll find that it'll be a lot of fun. I don't think you'll find that it's quite like other prosperity conferences or teachings. I'll read to you what I wrote about it if you haven't seen it online. The True Abundance Conference, facilitated by Reverend Mark Pope, Sunday, August 25th, 12:30 to 3. Who? Everyone is invited. Cost. Love offering. Come and participate in a conference that conveys unbounded love and clear wisdom in the exploration of the following prosperity principles and practices. Fine ideas. What exactly does that mean? It's not one of those I'm emphasizing this morning. The second one I am. The power of stillness and silence. The significance of gratitude, the power of blessing, giving and receiving, the faculty of imagination, which can be a lot of fun if we keep it in its place. And the other one I'm going to address myself to briefly. I don't know how to do briefly. We're supposed to start this day. It's already 11:35. I'm actually going to pay attention to what I'm saying and leave a few pauses between the words. Forgiveness. 100% of the proceeds from this conference are consecrated right now and dedicated to the following divine idea. New Thought Unity Center, and financial freedom for everyone. I'm not new at this prosperity stuff. I taught it for many years in the 80s. I've explored and experimented left and right, stumbled and fallen and gotten up again by grace. And I'm going to tell you this morning that next to stillness and silence, which I will believe, I think, until I die, is where it's all at. We're addicted to movement, motion, circumstance, and form, and concern for it. To break the spell, we really just need to turn. We don't even have to make the mind stop. We just have to notice the stillness that's here. It is filled with incomprehensible and unimaginable miraculous power. But there's another intention that I think is fairly important. It certainly, in my case, turned out to be the first really critical understanding, and it's called forgiveness. Now, we hear it all the time. But if we're careful and we look very directly at this little event that occurs in Scripture where the disciples are concerned about all this forgiveness stuff, and one of them asks, well, how many times do we need to forgive this guy? 7 times? 70 times 7. So grant me an opportunity to interpret. As long as you see anything wrong, you have forgiveness work to do. Period. I'm not much concerned with this argument about, well, we need to start with ourselves or start with somebody else, because it's misleading. There is nobody else. The reason somebody else appears in our world of awareness that looks like they might need our forgiveness is because we didn't bother to notice it in us. So the casting director in the sky produced a player to come and enter the screen for us, to show us that there's something in us that has yet to be fully seen correctly, that our perception has been blurred by some kind of conditioning. Not your fault, not my fault, not anyone's fault. I said from day one, and you will continue to hear me say, there is nobody at fault. The fact of our having resentments, hurts, old pain, and old suffering, the fact that we tend to react with rage or anger is nobody's fault. It's the human condition. The question isn't whose fault is it. The question is who's ready to be free from it and ready to recognize the simplicity of how such freedom is attained. If you prefer to keep your resentment going and stay convinced of your victimhood or someone else's, you're welcome to do that. Nobody can take it from you. And I would add, you probably can't get it out of yourself. The truth is, again, we need grace. I won't tell the long story. I've told the longer version. I've told it in many long versions. The short version of how I know this to be the case is through practice, which practice began in 1971 after having been incarcerated in reform schools, county jails, detention homes, locked psychiatric wards, and a maximum security into the Texas penitentiary for 7.5 of 9 years. Then I found myself getting out and going back to college, getting a job, and trying to do everything right, and I got arrested again for drug charges, of which I was entirely innocent, but looked guilty via circumstantial evidence. While in jail, you can imagine my story. See, I tried to do everything right, and life is still just screwing me. It's just a horrible place. I ran across a little book by James Allen. Many of you've read it. It's politically upgraded to more politically correct language now. We have as a man thinketh, and we have as a woman thinketh, and as far as I'm concerned, we can have as an alien thinketh. It doesn't really much matter. But it says, as we think in our heart, not up here in our head, which is a way of suggesting that in some way, something is embedded in us that is some kind of an attitude or belief system is trapped within us that is constricting and limiting and producing events that look like life is doing it to us. But I was under $300,000 bond. And the district attorney had gone on television and guaranteed me a life sentence as an incorrigible criminal, having been arrested by that time some 25 times. So I laid in jail and felt bad. picked up the book, and the book said, I'm very much paraphrasing two things. The attitudes that are deeply embedded in us tend to produce our life experience. The most toxic, limiting of all attitudes possible is resentment. And love is the most liberating. Since all other options had been taken away, I was at least open to the possibility that maybe there were some hidden resentments in it. I was still surprised, however, when, upon taking a careful inventory, I could not find anyone that had ever been very close to me that I didn't resent. So, for me, it became a hypothesis. This is not a theology and a belief system, nor would I sell it as such to you. I present it to you just as I took it myself. A hypothesis. What if, down inside me, there's something buried? Who knows how it got there? It doesn't matter. All I know is there's something in there that's producing, at least at times, some experiences that seem limiting, frightening, confusing, hurtful. What if there's a power that can remove that from me? Even if I can't see where it came from or how it got there. So I practiced forgiveness. I began to think of the guards and the foremen who had beaten me, the girlfriends who had, of course, abandoned me. God would only know how many I would abandon myself later. The parents that didn't understand me or confused me. The friends who were the actual guilty parties in this crime who did not come forward and tell the district attorney I was innocent, but were willing to see me get a life sentence for a crime they had committed. You could find all the justifications in the world to keep blaming and resenting and sketching. But none of them offered freedom. Only the little book, Love Liberates. Then I said to myself, well, I don't know how to love these people. I'm not even sure I know what love is. So I started thinking about it. I started thinking about all the times I'd been hurt and how many times I had, in fact, behaved in ways that may well have been hurtful to others. And I got a little bit of an understanding of how that dynamic works in us. So instead of anything real sophisticated, I just sat there and I imagined the faces of all these people, and they were numerous. And I would just say, I'm really, really, really sorry I've been mad at you so long. I don't know why you did whatever you did. I don't even know exactly what you really did. I might not even remember it right. But I think it's hurting me to be upset with you. That's all I did. Did it over and over and over and over again. I was in a 100-man tank in a jailhouse in Harris County. Not a place where one would wisely communicate to the larger prison population that you were busy practicing forgiveness. So I would lay on my bunk and pretend to be semi-napping. In addition, I'd released energy that could be used inwardly more readily. So I went on a 10-day fast, and I hid that too. I'd flush my food when no one was looking. And I would lay there in the bed and try to forgive people. One day, I saw a body laying on a bunk. And I looked at the body, and it was an earlier version of this one. And I saw its mind feebly trying to forgive people. I knew it wasn't a very powerful event. I knew it really didn't have the power to forgive anything. But I knew that its intention and its willingness to forgive were enough. What else I knew that I can't say in words. Instantly I was back in my body and I was changed. A series of miracles unfolded that led me into a courtroom where a jury had been picked, and the district attorney had once again gone before the TV cameras guaranteeing me a life sentence, because here in Texas, we're going to drive the point home. We're not going to put up with these druggies. Minutes before the trial started, a gavel banged in the courtroom. I was in a holdover cell, and my attorney came around the corner and asked me if I was ready to go home. I said, what do you mean? He said, I can't really explain this, but a few weeks ago, he said, I woke up in the middle of the night, I couldn't sleep. I was sitting at my desk, looking through some of my material, and I happened to open a law book. And where I opened it to randomly was a judgment by the Supreme Court that said a search warrant, in order to be legal, had to have these four components. It had to name the state, the county, the city, and either the street address or a physical description of the place to be searched. He said, with my caseload, I still cannot explain to this day why I even thought of you, but I did. Pulled out your folder, looked at the search warrant used to search the property, and found that it said Harris County, River Road, Texas. It didn't name a city. Your search warrant is technically illegal. I had drawn Judge Sam Davis, who was not so warmly referred to inside the jail cells as Iceman, because he would sleep through half the trial before he handed out life sentences. But he determined that it would only be a waste of the taxpayers' money to pursue the case, because eventually it would be reversed based on the fact that the evidence used to convict you was obtained by an illegal search warrant. All cases have been dismissed, and you were free to go. Forgiveness. I didn't do it. All I did was be willing. Grace did it. It poured through me. I failed to put in one tiny other manifestation of this. Since we're speaking of abundance, I think it's an interesting, not nearly as interesting as the rest of the story to me. My freedom was at stake. My life was at stake. I had already been to maximum security prison in Texas, and it was hell. But as I was doing all this forgiveness work, I couldn't just lay on my bed. That would have been suspicious. What else I did was play poker. And in those days, in the county jail in Harris County, we played poker for what we call chits. They were coupons that represented amounts of money you had on the books. A visitor leaves you $20, you get $20 in chits. And we played poker. So it was real money. I was always a fairly good poker player. But while playing poker, because possible change happening within me, I spent most of my time still doing this inner exercise, bringing up the people that I had thought had hurt me or harmed me or done me wrong. And the strangest thing began to happen. You'd have to know a little about poker to follow this, but I would draw a hand that by all rights and all computation, I should stay with and take more cards and make some calls. The odds were good, in other words. Something inside me would say, throw it away. And I, at that point, could care less about poker, so I threw it away. At other times, I'd draw a terrible hand, a hand you should never play. A little voice would say, stay in this one, and I would win. Over a period of about 40 days, I became what's known as the store in a 100-man tank. That's the guy that's got it all. Cardboard boxes filled with every possible negotiable item we could have. I had 2 laundry boys that worked for me to make sure my t-shirts and underwear were clean. And I loaned out money at exorbitant rates of interest. That's how you do it in jail, because who knows, they're going to make bond tomorrow and you're never going to get paid. So it's just good business. And that happened a long time before I knew I'd been really changed. But it was a clear indication that something very mystical and very gracious was at work. In summary, the teaching is grace. The emphasis this morning is on silence and stillness, and the invocation or invitation to have something larger than us change us in ways we must still need to be changed. And we know that we must, because we are still undergoing experiences and we are still finding ourselves in relationships that hurt and frustrate. They are not here to punish us. They are only here to point out to us that the work isn't complete yet. I don't know how much easier we can make it. Thank you. You still with me on this, Peggy? That was pretty intense. Y'all ready to laugh a minute? This is called Inner Peace. If you can start the day without caffeine, if you can always be cheerful, ignoring aches and pains, if you can resist complaining and boring people with your troubles, if you can eat the same food every day and be grateful for it, if you can understand when your loved ones are too busy to give you any time or attention, if you can take criticism and blame without resentment, if you can conquer tension without medical help, if you can relax without alcohol, and sleep without the aid of drugs, then you are probably the family dog.